Hello and welcome to The Good Life. Today we are talking about a subject that I love to work with. It is a subject that impacts every single client I have ever had who struggles with sleep. It is sleep anxiety. So, what that really means is anxiety about your sleep. This is a huge component of treating sleep. Sometimes, honestly, this is the main component. There's other components, clearly. I talk about a lot of things, but this is something that every single person I have worked with on their sleep is struggling with this, most people in a very major way. So, this is a huge comprehensive subject. We're not going to learn everything about sleep anxiety today, but I am going to give you some information that is hopefully information that you can start applying right away to help reduce your anxiety about sleep. First of all, anxiety is a normal human emotion. Just about every person experiences anxiety. When you are struggling to sleep, sleep anxiety is generally a huge part of it. Like I've said already, it is normal. It is treatable. There are people who have very little anxiety. There are people who have a ton of anxiety that impacts like every area of their life. But like I said, what I have found is that people who struggle with sleep anxiety in a very big way. Sleep anxiety goes in a cycle. Any type of anxiety goes in a cycle. It is a predictable cycle of behavior. If you start paying attention to your feelings, to your anxiety, to your experiences when you experience anxiety, and pay attention to your thoughts when it arises, that is going to help you. So as you start paying attention to your anxiety and noticing it and noticing its patterns, its predictable behavior, you're going to be able to start intervening to hopefully change that anxious cycle. What happens with anxiety is something happens that triggers the anxiety, that starts the anxiety. Then you respond by thinking things, believing things, doing predictable things that contribute to however you deal with that anxiety. So after you have those thoughts, those beliefs, things happen, your body responds, you do things behaviorally, and then you have whatever happens after that. Generally, the anxiety ends at some point. A lot of people have a lot of anxiety all the time, but there is a cycle. So that anxiety eventually dissipates, right? So there are things with anxiety that you do to reinforce anxiety. So when you think about that, think about the habits and behaviors that you engage in that does not effectively cope with the anxiety. It makes it worse, or it allows it to be unchanged in its intensity. So there are things that you can do that are going to make your anxiety worse or make it more intense or keep it the same. What we would like to do, because a lot of the times with sleep anxiety, pretty much all the time with sleep anxiety, it doesn't help you sleep. So let's give an example of, let's say you had a bad night of sleep, okay? You struggle with sleep, you had a bad night of sleep. The next night you go to bed, you are already anxious about going to bed because you're like, oh my gosh, I had a bad night of sleep. Am I going to sleep poorly again tonight? If I do, it's going to be the worst. You lay down and your nervous system is already stimulated and aroused. So you lay down, you're having these anxious thoughts about sleep. And then you lay down in bed and you toss and turn and you can't get comfortable and you're getting more irritated. And then the thoughts start happening. Maybe you're thinking like, oh my gosh, I'm going to have another bad night of sleep. Oh my gosh, I'm going to be so tired tomorrow. Tomorrow's going to be the worst. I have a really big project, or my kids have this really big thing going on and I'm going to be so irritated with them all day. I just know I will. So you have those thoughts. What happens inside of your body is your nervous system gets even more aroused and stimulated, and then you can't sleep. And so it's like this vicious cycle where you're having these thoughts, you're having these behaviors, your body's having a response, and then all of a sudden, like, your sleep is not getting better. You're not falling asleep. When you're stimulated and aroused, you're not sleeping. So that's an example of a cycle. Let's say eventually you have a fitful night of sleep. Maybe you stay up all night. Maybe you finally calm down and you're able to sleep a few hours, whatever happens. Those behaviors that you're doing that are stimulating and arousing you are not helping with that anxiety. So in order to handle this anxiety in a different way, you need to change. You're still going to have the same triggering event. You're probably going to go to bed a little nervous. Maybe you can do some things before you go to bed to bring down your autonomic arousal, to bring down your nervous system response, your stimulation, to be calmer before you go to bed. That could be a helpful thing. That's better than going to bed super worked up and having a terrible night of sleep all night. Maybe when those thoughts pop up, you can do some things differently. Instead of just running with those thoughts, you can be like, you know what? I'm going to stay calm. I'm going to get up out of bed. I'm going to relax. And I'm going to come back to bed when I am not so worked up and worried and anxious about how I'm going to sleep. So that's an example of a cycle of behavior. So the first example I gave was like where you're really doing some things that are not very helpful for your anxiety. You are reinforcing your anxiety, which again means it's going to stay the same or it's going to get worse. It is not going to get better. The second example, I gave you a couple brief examples of breaking that cycle. So same triggering event, you're nervous about going to bed, you're worried about getting a good night of sleep after you've had a bad night of sleep, but then you start implementing different behaviors that hopefully change that cycle so that you can actually sleep better and you can get some better sleep. So we want to start paying attention to our anxiety. When you pay attention, when you are aware of what you do, what you think, how you behave, how you feel, you are going to see that a lot of the things that you are doing are habitual, that you've been doing for a long time and are highly predictable. It's not a surprise if you have had bad sleep for 2 years and you have a set of behaviors that you do around bedtime. It's not a surprise that you're doing them most nights. Maybe you're unaware that you're doing them. Maybe you are stuck thinking, I don't know what to do differently, but you can become aware of what happens and what those cycles look like for you. And then with anxiety, you want to start doing things that don't reinforce those cycles. That is where things like my sleep program come in. We hit anxiety, we hit the cognitive and the behavioral things very, very hard. Every single person I've ever treated for sleep and who has come through my program or through my clinical practice does struggle with some type of sleep anxiety. 100%. People are not sleeping poorly that I am seeing. Maybe doctors are seeing them. Maybe it's sleep apnea or something like that. But if I'm seeing them for behavioral and habitual things that a mental health counselor can treat that's within their scope of practice, they are struggling with sleep anxiety and they are doing things that are reinforcing their sleep anxiety and not helping it, therefore making their sleep worse. So this is why I'm talking about it. So you can be like, oh yeah, I am actually doing a lot of things. I've been paying attention for a couple of weeks or a month or maybe just a couple nights. Maybe you catch on quick. And you're like, I am doing a lot of things that really aren't helpful. I need to break these cycles so that I can start sleeping better. So these are things that you want to start doing. I will tell you, this work can be some of the most challenging work that people do. It's not as easy as getting a new mattress or getting some sheets or putting up some room darkening shades or relaxing before bed and doing a meditation. Those are the things that are pretty easy, that feel good, that really aren't challenging these deeply ingrained behavioral cycles of anxiety that are related to your sleep. So this is hard work. It does take time. It can be frustrating, especially when you try it and it doesn't work right away, or you try it and it works and then you backslide and then you have to keep trying it. I always like to talk about behavioral change like this, stopping reinforcing anxiety, as something like playing a sport. I played volleyball. When I first started playing volleyball, I didn't just know how to do an overhand serve, right? If someone told me, Melissa, go do an overhand serve and get it across the net, we need you to do that for the team, and I just picked up the sport, I wouldn't know how to do it. I would have to practice it thousands of times to get good and to get efficient at it. This is the same type of thing. You need to practice these behaviors. You need to practice them more than once. This is the thing where people will try things for like 2-3 nights, maybe a week, and then they'll give up. This isn't the time to be doing something for a couple of days and then giving up. When you think about the habits that you are engaged in, you have been working on these habits for years. It takes a really long time and concerted effort to change your habits. It doesn't mean that you can't, but it will take a long time. I wouldn't expect that I would be able to consistently just sink my overhand serves after an hour of volleyball practice the first time in my life. I would anticipate it's probably going to take me a while. And then if I don't practice for a while and I don't play volleyball for 3 months, I'm not going to go back and just be really, really efficient at it. I'm going to have to get back into it. Yes, I'm going to have the muscle memory. Yes, I'm going to have those neural pathways built, so it'll be easier for me to do it. But I'm going to need to get back into it, do some repetitions in order to do it. So behavioral change is really the same thing. Again, sleep anxiety, like I said at the beginning, is something that impacts every single person I have worked with who is struggling to sleep. It's the one thing that everybody struggles with. I don't think there's one person who is struggling with sleep that's not some medical issue that I can't treat anyway. This is deeply ingrained. It is important. Everybody is struggling with it. And these are tips that you can learn and you can start implementing right away to change your sleep habits, to stop reinforcing unhelpful, ineffective, maladaptive sleep habits, and start developing new habits that allow you to sleep well. So I hope that this was good information. This is not going to be the only podcast episode that I do on anxiety. It's not even the only one I've done so far. Sleep anxiety is a huge part of sleep. Hopefully this gives you some information to start implementing starting tonight or starting whenever you have your next sleep that is going to help you start sleeping well. I'll see you in the next episode. Bye, guys.